But I think we'll open up to audience. So who'd like to ask a question? Yes. There's a microphone which might come.
If you can hear me, then
Sure,
I'm all right. I have two questions, if I may. The first question that I have touches on journalism and standards, and the second one touches on the sort of the media and the traditional media, and is that going to survive? Firstly, it's fascinating thinking about where journalism comes into this. An interesting example of what happened in the last 6 months was when Guido broke the Hague Christopher Myers type story of, he was seen with somebody in a hotel room, and subsequently it went from the blogosphere into the printed sort of the press, and then the ultimate, the pinnacle of what is seen to be appropriate to be discussed in public sphere, the BBC, and the BBC broke it. And when the BBC broke it, William Hague felt it necessary to make a statement that he and his wife had a number of miscarriages, which they would have liked to have kept private, but he now felt the need to rebut these sort of what he called innuendos about sexuality. I mean, was that hackery? Was that gutter journalism? Or was that a valuable and valid contribution to the open society and the public sphere? That's my first question. My second question is the mainstream press, the printed press, is said to be collapsing, every decade. The newspapers are going out of business. Is this true? What, if any, effect does the blogosphere have on this entire thing, with paywalls coming up and more mainstream journalists blogging and with questions like that?
Okay, let's see. Does anyone on the panel who wants to take that?
Well, I'll take the first question. I mean, he didn't break the story. Basically, the Telegraph hinted towards it quite strongly in sort of the Daily Mail first, and then he bounced off that. But what was different was that he got one piece of information I believe about the fact that Hague had said that he hadn't shared a room, but he did share a room. But basically, the picture of Hague with Chris Myers walking around in the thing, that was in the Daily Mail first. So basically, as far as I can deduce, there were lots of rumours going around in the Daily Mail and Telegraph decided to hint at it first, and then it got picked, and then Guido sort of kept on running the rumour mill for quite a while, and then they bounced back. So basically, it wasn't a Damien McBride story. It was different because they played a mutually, complementary role, and they knew what was going on. The Daily Mail knew what was going on, so did the Daily Telegraph, and they basically worked from each other. So, is it gutter journalism? I think it is. I mean, we wouldn't have, even if someone gave me that story, I wouldn't have run it. It's completely different to something like WikiLeaks, where I feel that you are trying to break down or go into what diplomats are saying, what governments are saying about policy. I mean, that kind of stuff, which is purely about people's private lives, we don't touch unless it's shown to have a direct impact on policy, anything like that. So, I think it is, but And as for the second point, I don't think blogs really contributed towards the financial problems that newspapers are having. That's generally the internet, because people just get the information for free, and therefore they don't feel like they need to pay for it. And I can read the New York Times every day without having to pay for it. The problem is, of course, that the economic models to replace print journalism have not come about yet, and so because it's not financially viable to make enough money from the web, newspapers are having a problem, but that doesn't mean that's going to continue.
Next question. Yes.
I think what's really interesting about I think what's really interesting about this discussion, which Sunny, you probably remember, we went to have these discussions about 5 years ago, and it's fascinating how the roles have been kind of reversed, or at least they've been mashed up a lot. 5 years ago, Steve Richards, David Aranovich, etc., would have poured scorn upon the bloggers and said how facile, unreliable, disgusting, and more popular they are than mainstream media. And I think I remember having that conversation with Steve Richards, on Radio 4 somewhere, and how they were going to bring down the newspaper industry, and they were going to bring down the European Union because they couldn't be trusted as well. And then we found other ways of doing that. But now I see it's almost a reversal, that mainstream media has become so bloggish, and David and Steve are all on Twitter, and they are all, I think, in very many ways acting more like whatever bloggers act like. They're more informal, they're more open, they're more interactive. So I wonder, funny enough, it's kind of, and I always like to tease people like John and say by accusing them of being journalists, and they always bristle at that. But of course, that you are all now part of, and somebody's just referred to it, a kind of networkedness where Paul, when he does these stories, it's entirely networked into mainstream media, and he then goes to them for an even bigger platform than his own portal. And I think in a way that what was interesting when we were talking about working more collaboratively and towards a project, because the idea of the lone blogger who's going to take down people doesn't obtain, or that somehow the blogger is more ethically pure, because evidence seems to be that your actual bloggers are less interactive, they're often less transparent about who they are and what they do. So I'm interested in that. Here's the final bit, it's the big W. I think, Sonny, you're the only person I've heard mention WikiLeaks, and whether that has overtaken at a time when the blogginess has now become part of the mainstream, or vice versa, the mainstream's become part of the blogginess, whether it's WikiLeaks is going to be the real shock to the system that we all hoped the blogs might be.
Let's start with Bruno, and then maybe someone else would like to pick on that.
I think a lot of the reason why newspapers kind of imitated the internet, often taking its most facile, cretinistic aspects, like basic content about what are the top ranking stories on Google News, which is basically the sum total of masturbating teenagers and bored office workers, shows profound insecurity about ideas, what the public means, what the job of a newspaper is. I don't think that all the kind of imitations of the internet and the blogosphere and certainly the ghastly Twitter and that just are often expresses people's kind of insecurity and a lowest common denominator in the face of insecurity. WikiLeaks, I think one of the things that's interesting about WikiLeaks is how a kind of big kind of lump of documents is kind of gradually finding its way into the public domain, and the way in which the leak of those documents has been covered reflects all the problems with the media. So, people are much more fascinated about whether Julian Assange was wearing a condom when he had sex with a Swede, and of course the authorities are as well. Some of the really interesting parts of the cables that have been revealed haven't been properly covered. Other elements about, what a diplomat said about Nicolas Sarkozy, So the WikiLeaks has been a bit pop bitch, really. It's kind of diplomats, bitchy, catty diplomats saying, Angela Merkel, she's a bit frumpy, isn't she? Kind of stuff. Whereas there has actually been some really important stuff, the most important being the contingency planning for an invasion of the Baltic states by Russia, which is genuinely shocking. It's actually incredibly important. There was also some of the cables from Ankara as well, got very little pickup, which are extremely important, explain a lot what's going on. So what I'm saying is that actually, but some of the appearances of things are because everybody, because I don't think you can blame newspapers, I don't think you can blame bloggers, you can't blame the internet. Maybe everybody's not kind of doing what they should do and be a bit more, kind of rigorous and a bit more demanding about what we read. So we wouldn't have to put up with kind of bullshit stories, quite frankly, about whether or not William Hague likes to hang out